Today, we have another interview in action from the conferences that just happened down here in Miami and Orlando. My name is Bill Russell. I'm a former CIO for a 16-hospital system and creator of This Week Health, a set of channels dedicated to keeping health IT staff current and engaged. We want to thank our show sponsors who are investing in developing the next generation of health leaders: Gordian Dynamics, Quill Health, Tausight, Nuance, Canon Medical, and Current Health. Check them out at thisweekhealth.com/today. Here we go. Here we are at HIMSS 2022, and we've caught up with Andrew Rosenberg with Michigan Medicine. Do I have that right, or is it University of Michigan?
No, Michigan Medicine.
Michigan Medicine.
It's the University of Michigan Health System and Medical School.
Great. CIO. It's always great to catch up with you. It's so interesting because every CIO I talk to, no offense to the CIOs, I love talking to CIOs. They want to talk innovation and the really cool things they're doing. And you always bring me back down to earth, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, I've been talking about how I don't want to do innovation. And of course, especially at a place like Michigan Medicine, we're doing it all the time. But I think that we talk so much about transformation and innovation and disruption when most of us recognize we have to do blocking and tackling. And so I was mentioning this the other day at a panel where I said we're focused on three things. We're focused on communications, large application implementation, and continuity and resiliency, right? I mean, there's nothing innovative about any three of those.
But there's innovation within each of those.
Absolutely, right.
And so it's interesting because the focus on innovation to me can become sort of a background noise, because we expect innovation to happen at the bedside. The nurse looks at something and says, we could do this better. And then there's innovation that comes from that. But I think your point is they can't do it if we're not doing the basic blocking and tackling. It's like, if our system's down, there's very little we can do with regard to innovation. So.
Right, and I was also giving a few examples. One, for example, with communication. Many of us are working on unified communication, but really in many ways we're also trying to migrate away from paging. And that in and of itself takes time and effort to get out of a 40-year-old legacy workflow and all the infrastructure, because we've tied so much of our work into an old technology. So how do we not just get out of paging and get to something like unified communications with different types of devices, but then how does that then support some degree of innovation, mobility, the connectedness of individuals who take care of patients or families that cross the typical silos of inpatient and ambulatory. And suddenly that unified communication tool is a platform for a variety of tasks that caregivers, wayfinding, I've added into it. We want to increasingly know where people are, including our own staff, faculty, residents, medical students. So the devices that we use for unified communication also become a device for wayfinding, and then it gets into resource management. And suddenly you're talking about the infrastructure you need to start tracking people, which then you get into wayfinding for patients and their families. And what started out as, let's get rid of paging, what do we need to do, becomes more of a meta theme around areas that are innovative.
All right, these are short interviews, so I'm going to go deep with you on communication, because you brought it up.
Okay.
I'm going to go call centers and faxes. Which one do you want to start with?
Faxes.
Faxes, all right. So if I were to walk around, I've talked to a CIO once who said, every time I see a fax, and it's a CIO you would respect, every time I see a fax, I know that there's a workflow issue or something broken here that we can automate. Now, I don't always have time to get to it, and I don't always, have the resources to get to it, but I know that all I have to do is walk around and look at those, find those faxes, and there's work to be done there. How many faxes do you think we would find if we went from end to end across Michigan Medicine?
Hundreds of thousands.
So it's still sure. Pretty much an integral part. This is getting back to your pager thing, it's still an integral part.
Right.
What's it going to take, and isn't even a good goal to try to move beyond faxes?
I think it's a great example of something that we would never want to talk about at a meeting like this. We would never want to bring up the keynote address on fax server and faxing in healthcare.
I don't know why nobody came to the conference.
Yeah, right. But really what we should say is, what are we doing explicitly to remove faxes from our environment which in and of itself would almost for sure stimulate and show areas of, if not innovation, at least a modern and current method. Health information exchange being one major one. But I think part of the problem with faxes is, similar to paging, these deep legacy workflows get at regulations, they get at payers, they get at payments, they get at old workflows. And so I think the way to do it is to find a couple of very key leaders in the areas where we're sending the most faxes and ask them and help them. This is where I think CIOs and other IT leaders can help the business transform by saying, tell me your top 3 areas where we're sending faxes, and we can almost in a 2x2 column show where new technologies could substitute that, and we chip away at the problem.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times I'll get, look, at that small office, that fax is an integral part of the workflow, getting the information, because you're going to say, oh, we'll get it digitally, but I'll go to the other side and they won't be able to transmit it digitally.
Right.
But they have a fax, they just drop it in, I get the information, we can keep doing it.
Or they think they have to use a fax.
Right.
I mean, I hear it not infrequently, well, it's required still. And I don't know how true that really is or not. I suspect part of it is, but I think this is an example of one of those things where it doesn't sound sexy and so we don't really work on it. But if you dive into probably a half a dozen use cases,
yeah, you could drive some real
certainly
efficiency.
can. And I use paging as that example because as a CIO, as a physician, I still like paging. Being an anesthesiologist, understanding code teams and airway teams, I feel a little bit more secure by having a pager than I do my iPhone. But if you start to chip away at other areas that don't need paging, the one that concerns me as a CIO are the underlying paging platforms and antenna systems that over time are just not getting the kind of investments needed, and over time are going to become more and more brittle, unreliable, less regulated, certainly even more insecure than they already are. So you just chip away at it.
Talk to me about how many, at our health system, we had so many call systems. I don't remember counting them. Do you have a lot of call systems or call centers, or have you
We do. Well, we're going through a massive consolidation right now. And again, it's a two-pronged approach. One of them is just classic ambulatory care operations, looking to consolidate. And that is a slog because the inevitable arguments that there's legitimacy to it, where a specific clinic or type of care, they want their call center people who also understand their workflow to come together because it's for patient satisfaction, engagement. We're using the fact that we're moving out our ACD to a new one and using that technical implementation to also help consolidate down the call centers, one of which is to reduce the number of scripts being written or supported. So if we had about 200 plus call centers at Michigan Medicine, one of the challenges, we had 200 plus different methods, scripts that had to be supported by the ACD. Ideally, we would say the ideal one is to have one call center. That's almost too restrictive.
Right.
So it's a good example, again, where a technology implementation can also help drive some of the business improvement, in this case, a consolidation effort.
Do you see a drive, this will have to be my last question here, but do you see a drive towards some of those consumer technologies to get more of a holistic view of how people are interacting with Michigan so that you can interact with them in the ways that...
I think there's a real duality there. A clinician would argue to do exactly what you just said, to support that consumerism, the engagement side, we need the differentiated call centers.
Okay.
The other argument also could be made for a better patient experience, less of a non-standard, more of a unified experience by consolidation. It's very much in the eye of the beholder. Because from an operations point of view, I think you're going to see and hear both arguments that have some legitimacy. This is where I used the start of this whole conversation. Let's use IT in some ways in a way we would typically not. Let us be part of the driver for the direction we want to go. In this case, as a CIO, I would choose a more standard, a little bit more of a homogenized approach. From a technology point of view, to inform some of those business choices. But I can say it also as a clinician.
Fantastic. Andrew, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Another great interview. I want to thank everybody who spent time with us at the conferences. It is phenomenal that you shared your wisdom and your experience with the community, and it is greatly appreciated. We also want to thank our channel sponsors who are investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health leaders: Gordian Dynamics, Quill Health, Tausight, Nuance, Canon Medical, and Current Health. Check them out at thisweekhealth.com/today. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.